Lovely to have you all here. Thank you for making the time to come to our third Neurodivergent Birth Awareness Week webinar. We've been absolutely loving meeting so many people this week, hearing from so many new partners and connections, and learning from the people who have really generously given up their time to come and speak to us. And today we're very lucky in that we have two of the founder members of the Maternity Autism Research Group coming to speak to us today. The Maternity Autism Research Group brings together healthcare professionals and researchers to undertake research and provide information about autism relating to pregnancy and maternity care. And they're going to speak a bit more about their work later. I'm Jo Rees-Davis. I was going to say I'm standing in for Victoria White, but I see that Victoria has made it too. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for Neurodivergent Birth, and I'm really delighted to be able to be the introductory person for this webinar this lunchtime. It's particularly exciting for me because I'm based in Wales, albeit that Neurodivergent Birth is a UK-wide, maybe perhaps one day global-wide social impact organisation. But some of the founding members from the Maternity Autism Research Group are also based in Wales and carrying out their PhD research in Wales. So it's really exciting for me that we're going to be touching on that sort of Welsh healthcare equity part of things as well. What else do I want to say? If you would like to write questions in the chat at any time throughout the presentation, please do. If at the end you want to be brave and come on mic or camera to ask a question live, you'd be very welcome to do so. But if you don't want to do that, that's also absolutely fine. If you're not comfortable to do that, write in the chat. I'll keep an eye on the chat. And as far as I can in the time we've got, I'll make sure that everybody's question gets asked. I'm going to very briefly introduce Hayley and Sara, who we have here today, and then I'm going to hand over. I'm going to do the slides, and I will let them expand both on my introduction and on the amazing work that they're doing. So thank you, Hayley, and thank you, Sara, for being here. We're really delighted to have you here, and we love working with the Maternity Autism Research Group. Sara King is the Vice Chair of the Maternity Autism Research Group. Sara is a doctoral researcher studying for her PhD with the Autism Centre for Education Research at the University of Birmingham. Sara's PhD is exploring autistic women and birthing people's experiences of maternity care and also maternity staff's understanding of supporting autistic people through the perinatal period. Sara is herself autistic, and she has autistic and other neurodivergent family members. And Sara also works as a trainer and mentor, as well as leading a number of peer discussion groups for several autism specialist organisations. So thank you, Sara. Thank you very much. I know you are mid-PhD writing up, so really grateful for you giving up this precious hour of writing time to speak to us. And Hayley is here as well. Hayley Morgan is the chair of the Maternity Autism Research Group. And Hayley's been writing
after Christmas.
It's a Sunday.
Got some people who need to be on mute. Let's see if I can mute people. If everyone can just pop themselves on mute, that would be fantastic and very appreciated.
Jo, do you want to make me co-host and I can mute people as they come in?
That would be really helpful. Thank you.
No problem. Angelica, are you able to mute, please?
In Harry,
are you able to mute?
Name day.
Yeah,
name day.
It's basically in the calendar. There is the day, and every day there is a name with the day. My son,
thank you.
And the name is on the 30th of December, so that's the name day.
And I think I've muted Angelica. Sorry about that, everybody.
That's okay.
Back to Hayley. So I was saying that Hayley is the chair of MARG, as we also like to refer to them. Now, Hayley's been writing about the autistic birth experience for over a decade now, originally inspired in 2015 by her own personal journey and her own formal diagnosis. Hayley is also a doctoral researcher, and her research involves a three-part investigation into the experience of autistic birthers, of their birth partners who will be with them, and of the midwives who are caring for those families. Hayley hopes to publish that by the end of this year. Hayley's also a published author in this field already, and she has co-written the key text, Supporting Autistic People Through Pregnancy and Birth. And we will link to that in our notes when we put this up on our YouTube channel later. So without further ado, I'm going to start sharing my slides, and I'll hand over to Hayley and to Sara, and mute myself, and I'll let you take it from here, Hayley and Sara.
Text that.
Yeah, I'm going to send on Messenger because it will be easier because it's long.
Right, that's fine.
Yeah.
We'll get that either or.
Yeah.
And I have a wee look at it and you'll be saying, it's only the 23rd and I'm on holiday. Oh, I forgot.
Okay. Amazing start. Fantastic. So yeah, I think I've just opened my mouth and given it away. So I'm the Welsh one. I'm Hayley. So as you can guess by the surname, but yes, I'm Hayley. And it's a pleasure to see you, and thank you so much for lending your time. I know this festive period and the run up to Christmas, it's quite difficult to eke out that time, but if I do forget later, I want to thank you for spending your time opening your mind to this research and such an important topic. Sara, do you want to say anything before we proceed to the slides?
Yeah, just thanks so much for having us and for putting together this fabulous week as well. It's really exciting to have a whole week of activities looking at neurodivergent birth. So I'm looking forward to tapping into some of those others later as well. But yeah, thank you.
Okie dokie. So can we have the first slide, please? Oh, see, before I even finish the sentence. Amazing. Okay, if only maternity care was that responsive, preemptive of needs, say, but we're gonna dig into that a little bit more. Okay, so we're gonna kind of things are split up quite evenly. We've run through this before, so you won't be just struggling to understand me for the next hour. It will be split up. But what is neurodivergence? Now, I think everybody who will have signed up, but you've got to this point, you've probably got your own idea of it. What many people don't understand is that there's really quite a complex underlying journey to coin the term. There's a complex history to it as well, quite a politically based one as well. So depending on who you talk to, people have different ideas of neurodivergence, not just in terms of what does autism mean, what does ADHD mean, but what do we mean by neurodivergence? So it's always important to clarify what you mean by that. So in this presentation, for the purposes of this presentation and our work, what Sara and I mean is that this refers to inherent natural variations in cognitive functioning that differ from what we consider mainstream or neurotypical or non-autistic norms. Sara and I, our work with Marge and in our PhDs and other projects is autism based. However, we have scope in knowledge of other co-occurring developmental profiles and conditions. So these things, never really exist in a vacuum. So using neurodivergence for the purposes of this is quite useful as well. So examples can include autism, ADHD, sensory processing differences or disorders. The terms themselves change over years and with developments to the diagnostic criteria and so on. So these things are fluid and change through time as they should. These variations, like it says there, influence experiences during pregnancy, birth and postnatal care. So an intrinsic, inherent way that you perceive, process and communicate with the world outside you, regardless of what label you add to it. If you are different from the mainstream, it's going to affect, or it's likely to affect, here I've got my researcher caveat hat on there, is likely to affect your perinatal and postnatal experiences. But it hasn't always been the case. So when I started looking at this topic, I'm going to hazard a guess at 2017. I quickly become very passionate about it because I realised I was autistic just after my second birth in 2016. So I joined a master's course on autism at Swansea to find out more about autism. And basically, like Sara and I joke quite often, I've done a PhD to understand my own birth experience. Research is a very empowering thing. But as you can imagine, I've got all this special interest energy, this autistic hyperfocus, and I bring this to present. Yes, I'm going to do my dissertation on the autistic birth experience. And I was met with half a class of peers who were very encouraging and think, yeah, I can see why you'd want to investigate that. And half who had very unresponsive faces, shall we say. You know, being a mother of 2 boys who don't care what I do for a living, I'm kind of used to that. But this was met with statements like, well, autistic people give birth, babies come out the same way, so why would you need to spend precious research time and energy on something that shouldn't really differ that much? But again, that was 2017, and things have changed massively since then. So yeah, we're going to cover a bit of that timeline, that journey as well. I think I've covered, okay, just another little caveat as well. This beautiful picture is one of the beautiful feedings. That's me feeding my youngest, sorry, and I just get distracted by those beautiful hairs. Yes, sorry, so what brought us to our research? So I touched slightly on my journey. So I realized I was autistic between my birth. I was more comfortable in my identity, and I had massively different experiences when I had no idea I was different, to feeling slightly more empowered and understanding myself. So I did a master's and a PhD and wrote a book, you know, to understand things, as is a very autistic coping mechanism. But Sara has a similar but slightly different journey, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my it was my own personal experience as well that brought me to doing a PhD, as Hayley said. I didn't know that I was autistic until well after my second son was in school. So my children are a little bit older than Hayley's, but my experience was very different, and part of my recognition of being autistic was because of my experiences of maternity services. And so the drive for me really to do the PhD was to understand my own experience, to understand others' experiences, because what occurred to me once I realized I was autistic was, my gosh, that explains that experience so well. I wonder what that was like for other autistic people, and then what can be done to make things better. So that was the drive for me. Though I had good care. I had an emergency cesarean with my first son, which impacted on my well-being actually, but that wasn't because of the care, that was because of the experience. And had postnatal depression and anxiety, and I think also autistic burnout when I look back. I think that was actually what happened, and I think I had that going on until I was pregnant with my second son 4 years later. So it was a long ongoing thing. And realizing I was autistic then helped me understand the impact of that experience, as I said, and made me wonder about other people's experiences. It also led me to having an elective cesarean for my second birth, just because I didn't think I could manage the risk of that emergency approach again, and how that affected me. So it did affect that care. But yeah, so that's sort of what brought me to it really. And it's been an amazing journey. Now we're so close to the end. And I've been doing my PhD part-time, so I'm into my 7th year now. And before that I did a small project as part of a postgraduate diploma as well. So I've been looking at this research field, sort of similar time frame to Hayley really. It's been a very lengthy process to come to some sort of understanding of my own experience and the whole experience and the phenomenon. So yeah.
And something that we've bonded on as well since then is that the research itself, when I first started, I was looking at systematic reviews on this topic, and there was nothing out there. There was a lot of risk-focused literature. There were issues like you are more likely to have an autistic child if, so I think it was in utero maternal exposure to hurricanes. That was one of them. Another one was if the paternal grandfather was an engineer and coming from a steel town, that would mean that most of Port Albert is autistic. None of these things were tracking. There was also autistic pregnant zebrafish. I don't know how those surveys got completed, but you know, credit where it's due. But the research back then was incredibly risk focused and depersonalized. And again, we using our personal stories to kind of time frame that. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling on a little bit. Sorry, I do get excited. But why autism? So autism specifically, yes, we're talking about neurodivergence, but when you just look at autism specifically, it's one of the few conditions or neurodevelopmental profiles or identities, however you want to frame it yourself or for your professional reasons. However you want to frame it, it's one of the few that affects in terms of social care and social opportunities, education, health. We very rarely see it affect so many domains of daily life and determinants of health and access to things throughout the lifespan. And it's also part of the reason that we have such a tight community. And I don't just mean that, between Marge people. I mean, the autistic community is incredibly tight because there are a lot of overlapping experiences, sometimes trauma, sometimes very empowering stories. But it's one of the things I like to always get out there as well. But it can affect, in terms of how do we define autism specifically, there are generally, to get diagnosed, you have to have certain characteristics, and they generally fall around social communication, social interaction. Sensory is beginning to make its way into assessments as well in terms of importance, but they kind of fall and overlap quite similarly. And in terms of recognizing these, it's absolutely essential. In terms of our rights as well, understanding neurodivergent rights is a massive must in terms of legally or in terms of policy, where you work or where you're acting as a professional caring for autistic people. And one of the ways to start from the ground up is it must be neuro-affirming. Research and the autistic community themselves are always saying that we don't need things to try to fix or remedy the way we exist. We need it to be identified and we need to be enabled to be empowered. And in maternity care, that is certainly true. But again, depending on whether someone considers their disability in a certain light, it depends whether they want to disclose, because there can be fear of disclosing. So again, autism and neurodivergence may be under the Equality Act, which is a huge legal framework here in the UK, but it's not always recognised, is what we're saying. In terms of ethical care as well, there's an ethical onus, regardless of how we frame neurodivergence, regardless of how much you know about the characteristics of autism or the pathway. In terms of an ethical onus, a lot of medical professionals sign up to care for people and throughout their practice are used to adapting care. So some of the main things to adapt maternity care practices would be looking at adapting communication styles, looking at the sensory environment, decision-making processes, and making sure that shared decision-making, informed consent, and informed consent over procedures is something that keeps coming up in research, particularly in my MSc and PhD data. So in terms of, yes, there's a legal obligation. It's also about delivering ethical and person-centered care, which I'm sure everybody who has taken the time to learn more about this wants to deliver. But we also need to consider that there are slight differences between the devolved nations' policies and evaluations. Sara has illustrated this to me in the past as well, about how complex these policies and guidelines between the nations. So yes, it can be complex, but if you start with neuro-affirming care, it's a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sort of individualising of care is what's crucial as well. And yeah, I've done a very complicated sort of landscaping map of services just in England, because my PhD is focusing on services in England, which will be in my thesis. But Hayley and I have had some interesting discussions about the differences between Wales and England as well. So yeah, so we want to talk a little bit about reflection, self-reflection, reflection in services. And we're both really passionate about this, about people reflecting in their care about how being neurodivergent might be different, particularly if it's not your experience. If you're not neurodivergent, how to be thinking about that. How can you reflect on the neurodivergent experience if that's not your experience? So we wanted to talk a little bit about that today. Both Hayley and I both work as we do some training work, and we really like to share sort of personal experiences in that, because we really recognise that it's an easier way to convey information about experiences. If I share some of my personal experiences, how that felt for me and why that was, it can really help convey that information. So I think it's important that we're sharing sort of those neurodivergent experiences so that can support reflection. When we finish our PhDs, both of us, and share our discuss the methodologies that we've used, we've done these quite differently, but we've really used participatory approaches, and feel it's really important to have the neurodivergent voice, the autistic voice in our cases, at the sort of heart of what we're doing. So we do have some differences in our PhDs, but sort of thinking about reflection, we'd like people to really think, be curious. Be curious about neurodivergence, be curious about autism, and come to that from a position of you may already be an experienced practitioner, but if you're not neurodivergent, how do you have that insight? So sort of coming to it from a place of humility and curiosity, and then to do something with that and advocate. So we would really like to suggest that people seek out new knowledge, and I know Neurodivergent Birth have got a range of podcasts where you can find that information. You're here already listening to that, so hopefully you've explored some of those other ones. But we would urge you to seek out neurodivergent voice and that lived experience to communicate, to understand and think about your learning. It's a whole different way of experiencing the world. It's the way we communicate is different. The way we experience our sensory experience is different. If that's not your experience, for example, if you've not come across pain presentation difference, or interoception differences, or synesthesia, which we'll talk about shortly, in my research, the midwives and other health professionals, maternity services staff, absolutely wanted to support people to the best of their ability. But how can you do that if you don't have that understanding of what the difference is and what needs are based on that? So that really highlights the need for neuroaffirming, neurodivergent-led training, and the reflection and listening has to be based on that too. Yeah, I think that willingness to make change, if you're advocating, is absolutely, advocate for others is absolutely crucial. And really, when you're thinking about reflection, it's about progress and not perfection. You're not always going to get it right for everybody because everybody's individual, but having that willingness to understand and learn will go a long way. Ask questions and seek out information.
Yeah, I really I wanted to add in, just wanted to add in that, like, perfectionism isn't possible. You won't get a group of autistic researchers, or maybe even people who could pin down a definite black and white definition of neurodivergence or autism. So we are not expecting or demanding perfection. We're just looking at autism-informed adapted care. But the ramifications are huge. And how do you get there? Well, one of the things is reflective practice, and this is something that all midwives do. I think everybody knows a bit of Gibbs or whatever reflective cycle you may have used. But in terms of how to better care for autistic or neurodivergent people, it really is key. So one of the things I like to imagine as well is, I can't remember, but it is part of reflective academia, where you have a quadrant, and you go from the unknown, so what you definitely don't know, what you don't know, and then moving to the next step along is addressing what you don't know. So you've identified, oh, I don't know enough about autism, co-occurring conditions. Okay, great, start there. So it's with small steps, I think, making yourself slightly uncomfortable, pushing yourself out of your boundaries to realize, okay, maybe this is next, and taking it one task at a time, because it's a huge, huge topic. And again, it's down to, I mean, experiences are largely down to individual care at this point because of where we are with the lack of official guidelines and pathways. However, further down the line, we will be looking at neuroaffirming evaluations of proper protocols. But at this point, we think reflection on an individual level is really key here. And again, this can also help the autistic person that's being cared for in childbirth and postnatally. A lot of autistic women or AFABs have difficulty in understanding their own needs, let alone communicating them, because many of us are late diagnosed. We're more likely to be late diagnosed, and therefore have masked so long that it's impossible to know what our needs are. And this can be a lifelong journey. It doesn't just magically happen once you get a diagnosis. Yes, thank you, Claire. Unconscious incompetence. Yes, I'm not going to try and pronounce that now, but thank you very much. That's exactly what I was talking about. So in terms of reflecting, and how do you know if you don't know? Okay, so one of the perfect examples for me is when I had this conversation with my husband. I didn't know I had synesthesia. How do you know you haven't got it? It's like this example I'm going to say now. So I have something called ticker tape synesthesia. It's one of the lesser known, less glamorous ones. It's one of the nerdy ones. It's quite similar to Sherlock, although I have fewer graphs. I have all text. So I remember this watershed moment when I said to my husband, I think it was the name of a Greek island or something, and he told me, and I said, I'm never going to remember that. I need you to write it down. How's it spelled? And he didn't know. I said, how do you remember anything? Doesn't it stop your script? And I'm showing like a ticker tape going across my mind's eye. He said, you're what? And he looked at me like I had two heads. I was like, well, no, I mean, this is why I'm impossible to argue with, because if he told me 10% on the 2nd of February, I've got like a file of facts, and I'm going to bring that up. I'm a nightmare to argue with. But it can be overwhelming. But until I'd had this eureka moment with my husband, I had no idea that not everybody else had this constant text that they can pull from. So if I look at a blank wall, even, you know, a landlord special, I can see magnolia, plaster, white cloth. I can see the words in like a light white text. If it's a language I don't know, it's more fuzzy and different colors, and it's difficult. So unless you ask the right question at the right time, or you reflect in the right way, you're unlikely to know, just like I did with my synesthesia. And it's quite it's more common in autistic people, isn't it, Sara?
Yeah, and you know, not everybody that's autistic has synesthesia, but I do as well. And one of the things I wanted to raise was, so for me, we know, don't we? It's quite commonly known that autistic people may have challenges with certain sounds, or find sounds difficult. But I think what other people might not understand, that people that aren't autistic or don't experience this, is that noise can be physically painful. So for me, my senses are a bit muddled with noise, and so the sound of the hand dryer, especially a fast, high blowing, I don't know how to describe that, a hand dryer that's quite powerful, hurts my teeth. So how I navigate the hand dryer in a public bathroom, if I have to use one, is to cover my teeth with my tongue, because it hurts otherwise. But that tongue covering reduces the pain. And other sounds hurt my stomach. It depends what the sound is, or it might hurt my fingertips. Now, if you're supporting somebody that's going through a painful experience, you might understand the typical pain, but actually, if you don't understand that the hand dryer is causing pain, that's really quite challenging. So I think and if you don't even know synesthesia is a thing. And for me as well, I see certain words as colours. So I haven't got the ticker tape thing that Hayley describes, but for me, Monday is blue and Thursday is yellow. I see those words in those colours. But I know other people that have quite intense synesthesia experiences and can kind of see other people's emotions in colour. Now, if you're supporting somebody and you don't know that's even a thing, how do you know unless you read about this and learn about this? And I'm also just seeing in the chat, I'm so excited about that work there. So I'm going to pick out that later on. But yeah, so yeah, we just wanted to pick up on that as an example of something that might be experienced differently that could have a massive impact.
And I think just to add a quick note, that's why it's important in research is from the ground up to be participatory, co-produced, to get autistic people not just guiding the study once you've decided on what you're going to do, but asking the autistic community, what are your values and what are your priorities right now for this research? Because without asking autistic people, you'll never know about synesthesia or about co-occurring conditions or these nuances. So, sorry, I just thought I'd add that because this is about research, sorry.
Yeah, so coming back to the sort of reflective practice, we put together a list of questions for midwives and other health professionals to consider about their reflective practice. And again, coming back to Hayley's point, it's not about perfection here. If you're not somebody that's done extensive research, or you don't want to, you don't find it easy to wade through research papers, that can take a long time to do. So there are places like Marge, like Neurodivergent Birth, Autistic Parents UK, who have done a lot of the filtering for you of research papers. So we have a research sharing framework and we assess research papers using that framework before we put them on our website. So think about your learning style and find resources that match your learning needs. And that for you, that might be podcasts, it might be videos, you might need research papers, you might process vicariously with other people by talking to others. So knowledge sharing sessions with people from different disciplines could be really useful. That's something we've been doing in March. So just some questions, how do I recognise and respond to neurodivergent needs in my practice? What assumptions might I hold? Have I ever witnessed or contributed to a situation where a neurodivergent person's autonomy or dignity was compromised? And if so, what could have been done differently about that? Questions about adapting communication style, questions about your confidence around sensory triggers. How do you ensure informed consent is truly informed for people that process information differently? This come up for both Hayley and myself in our research, and we'll be talking about that in our thesis, because there were situations where people were so overwhelmed that they either couldn't take on board what they were being told, or they were masking to cover up that they weren't processing that, or both. So it's a really, really important point. Thinking about the barriers that neurodivergent parents might face accessing care and what you can do about that, and how you find that research and how you find resources that are that have autistic values and voices at the heart. And as I've said, those resources Marge website has those. Do have a little dig around on our website if you haven't already. There's lots of resources on there, but the other ones I mentioned, as I said, Neurodivergent Birth and Autistic Parents UK, and there will be others as well. But if they're autistic led, that's a good sign to start looking.
Okay, so if I could crack my knuckles and not make everybody shudder, I would, because this is the slide. This is the slide where she gets ranty, folks, so buckle in. May as well sit down with your cup of tea. Okay. As a Welsh person, I do enjoy making a nuisance of myself and shouting. So this is what I'm going to do here. So we've gone from lovely, reflective, calm Sara to me. So buckle in. No. No, that is me using humour to make light of the fact that the legacy of the research that predates where we are now to be in a position where women are being listened to about autism is a wildly different landscape, and one that is just mired in detentions and eugenics, whitewashing, you name it. It is like worst humanity bingo, but it's not a bingo you want to play. So this is kind of the evolution of research. So how did we get to me and Sara and all the other Marges getting together and saying this isn't good enough? So it started way back when you've got Hans Asperger, you know, beginning to coin that this is slightly different from autism, which even before that was called childhood schizophrenia. The concept of autism itself has changed. But when we look at it, okay, we've got an idea about what this condition or this developmental profile is. It was blamed on mothers way back in the day, I think in the 30s and 40s. You've got refrigerator mother theory. So these autistic children and young people are not like this because this is the way they're wired and the way they're born, but it's a result that the mother's cold and standoffish and has a poor attachment style. The person who came up with this theory was then kind of pushed financially, I believe, to issue an apology to the largely white middle-class women who complained to his establishment about this theory. But the largely whitewashing of research is something that is still going on today. And again, we've got the legacy of Simon Baron-Cohen's work. So he's hailed as seminal, and he is still working at Cambridge today. Well, I don't know today, I haven't checked on him. All right, Sara, how are you doing? But in terms of seminal theory of mind, so that being, you know, his idea that autistic people have no concept of what other people are thinking, what's going on in their brains. They have no theory what's going on in the minds of others. Something that he coined in the 80s with Uta Frith. And I've unfortunately read that key seminal text that changed the landscape of everything, where throughout it he uses the term such creatures to refer to autistic people. Every time feels like you're being punched. And the fact that this person still has a solid career. Okay, I'm at an age now where I'm not bothered about saying these things. This person has never issued a public apology for using this wording and building a career on this. Is massively problematic, to say the least. And again, like I said, when I started the systematic review 2017, pregnant zebrafish, like, I'm sure if I tried really hard, I could learn some, you know, postnatal tips, you know, like leave your eggs somewhere. I don't know. It's a bit of a stretch to find yourself seen in research, even in 2017. So another thing is also I've said about these weird risk studies. But one of the things that is quite pertinent as well is something called broad autistic phenotype. So basically there's a lot of evidence when people say, oh, it's all genetic, isn't it? The most of the evidence from my time in the medical school anyway seems to lend itself that there's something called a broad autistic phenotype. So basically you inherit this underlying predisposition to be autistic when you are born, and your genetics are all set up, but it's a roll of the dice of what that looks like for you. But it's not necessarily a case of if mother has these autistic needs and child is going to have these autistic needs and so on. And there's also a lot of research that says not only does it occur genetically in families, that like attracts like. I think many people here will realize that, you know, it's easier to form relationships with people who see the world a bit differently, and you will find yourself drawn personally and professionally to other neurodivergent people. So when you're looking at adapting care, just like my research says, the birth partner is also something that needs to be factored in there as well. But in terms of the evolution of the research, it is hugely, highly problematic, and recent 5-10 years is only where we're beginning to see a human level of treatment.
Hayley, yeah, just to add to what Hayley said there, as an autism researcher, that stuff's difficult to read. That stuff there's a lot of emotional labour involved in that, and I found, you know, obviously we're doing this research in the same field, a lot of those same papers, mother blame, I'm calling them in my lit review. There's a lot of research looking at cause. You know, those things are still there and they're still ongoing. So I want to talk a little bit about this sort of shifting landscape, but really, I mean, some of that stuff's still there. The stigma is still there. Some of the difficult research is still happening and still there. But what's great to see is this sort of change, and the change is huge. It's happening I've watched it happen sort of, over the last couple of years, particularly. There's significant amount of research coming out, and that needs to keep going. It's really, really great to see. So before, I want to talk about the founding of Marge, but before that, there were lots of autistic people sharing their personal experiences of pregnancy and birth. That was starting to happen. People on social media, people sharing their stories. We founded Marge more than 3 years ago now, and some contacts I'd made through my PhD at the start, and I'd met up with Di Fox at the Royal College of Midwives Research Conference, and Hayley and I had been in touch before, and Hayley had other contacts before, so there were quite a few of us working in this area, and we set up a meeting just to say what can we do, what can we do together. And Marge was born from that meeting. So we are health professionals and researchers. We're all autistic, and some people are both. Some people are health professionals and researchers. So it's multidisciplinary, and it's a really supportive place to be. I found it, as having gone through all those difficult research papers, it's actually quite nice to be together with other people with the same sort of aims and goals in what we're trying to do. So there are more people looking at this topic, people doing individual PhDs, starting to see that work coming through now, and there are books now published, including the one Hayley mentioned earlier, which she's published, and also there are others on our website, so do go and have a look at the resource section, because we've got books there, autistic, written by autistic people, obviously neurodivergent birth, and birth rights are, we're much more aware of looking at people's birth rights, and what that means for autistic people in terms of seeking the care that they should have. There's a lot more research coming out around birth trauma, and it's one of the sort of key findings in a few of the research papers that have just been published, and also it's come out of mine, really, the output for many autistic people, although they have had some experiences of good care, a lot of it's trauma. So it's really important that we continue to look at the very, the detail of the autistic experience, and keep that autistic voice at the heart of the research that's happening. I also just wanted to highlight Dr. Amy Grant's project, which is the Wellcome Trust autistic-led projects, which is from menstruation to menopause, but also includes autistic pregnancy and birth and beyond, which has more than 100 videos. Am I right, Hayley? That's part of the same project for... Yeah, it's all part of the wider project. I just wanted to make sure I was being accurate with that. But do look at those. There's lots of useful information there for health professionals and autistic people. And lots of the Marge team were involved in those videos. Yeah, please do go and have a look at those. Okay.
And kind of looking at where we are now, so I've ranted a bit about where we've been, and it's important to understand where we've been to know where we're going and what's needed next. So currently, improvements are being made, but there is still emerging methodologies and gaps to be addressed. So in terms of, like I said earlier, making sure that autistic people are valued, their voices are on board and guiding the research, rather than just being a tokenistic, £10 for involvement in a focus group to make sure you agree with what we're doing. It's all very, 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 it seems like a fine line, but the difference in terms of participation means such a big difference. And we're beginning to see, in terms of applying for funding for certain research topics, it's becoming more and more required to have emancipatory projects, to have autistic people consulted before you've even decided upon what your aims and your strategies are. So things are looking up, and I hope that they keep on this trajectory. But I think it's impossible to do so successfully without acknowledging the legacy of the past. So while specifically we're looking at the medical model of disability, and by that I mean autism is something that needs to be fixed or remedied, there's something wrong with us, it still continues to this day to be the ghost at the party almost. And I think acknowledging its presence kind of I know you've all got the image of me like shouting at a random ghost now, but you need to speak of, okay, even when you're trying to recruit autistic people to have their voices heard, you need to understand that even today there are huge funded projects on both sides of the Atlantic that have had autistic people on board at very early junctures, and then you know, occluded their true research aims of being a genetic cure kind of. I'm not naming names, but there is a huge lack of trust between autistic people and researchers. So having autistic researchers guiding these things is really, really important in terms of trust as well. But in terms of co-occurring conditions, so yes, we've touched on synesthesia, but there are, you know, biopsychosocial aspects as well. So in terms of joints, like hypomobility is a really is far more commonly co-occurring in autistic people, and that does have ramifications for childbirth in terms of the progress. There's also co-occurring psychiatric conditions or psychological conditions. The medications are contraindicated to pregnancy. So we do need to also, I think, start to branch out autism and co-occurring conditions. But yes, there's also looking at in terms of chronic conditions and like an immunology side of things as well, in terms of autism. So we've got these umbrella of co-occurring conditions. We've also need to look at birth partners. I think my PhD, you know, the novel aspect of it is looking at birth partners and how they felt. The findings, again, unfortunately, are quite shocking. We do need to look at midwives' perspectives. So in terms of, you know, where are these experiences formed? It's not just a transactional approaches. These are very rich interactions. And we also need to look at other staff in the maternity settings as well. And then we've got between devolved nations, like I mentioned earlier, we need to look at not only what we're doing and what we need to do better, but make sure that how we measure success is based on autistic values and it's something that is measurable. For example, improving understanding of autism is not something you can measure unless you're giving everybody a multiple choice test, you know, and that even then that's not going to work. So we need to have measurable outcomes to drive change as well.
Hayley, are you all right to cover the top section?
Sorry, yes.
Yeah.
I forgot, yes. So in terms of autistic childbirth experience, like I said, even back in the day that, you know, getting a diagnosis was a very middle class white thing, and the legacy still happens today. When we look at both sides of the pond, again, yes, there are differences between the white experience of being an autistic birthing person and people who are not. You also look at the other intersectionality aspects of gender presentation. Autistic people are far more likely to be non-hetero and non-gender conforming. Social class is also a massive issue when we look at things like the rate of under or unemployment of autistic people is a massive issue as well. So whether, you know, you're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs kind of thing there, you're looking at, do they have secure accommodation? Do they know where their next meal is coming from? Now, I'm not saying that these are the case for all autistic people, but there are huge risk factors, or, you know, more likely to have these huge problems that intersect with their disability experience and amplify those barriers. And something we touch on as well is that the Embrace report, you know, these absolutely diabolical stats about the risks to black birthing women and birthing people. However, when you add autism onto that as well, that is something that is massively under-researched as well, and I don't think we put in the right value onto the right voices as well to make sure that we are covering all intersectionalities. Even just looking at the relevance of pain relief and whether it's adequate. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent now, but what I'm coming back to is that the wider determinants of health need to be considered. Autism doesn't occur alone. Yeah. Sorry, before you go on to the next slide, Sara, I was just going to cover.
Thanks, Hayley. Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about trauma as an outcome for autistic people, neurodivergent people, but misunderstandings can really lead to heightened trauma risk. And we know about the double empathy theory and also now the triple empathy theory from Sara et al. When we're thinking about that in the context of sort of building on the double empathy theory, but in the context of healthcare, and how jargon and the culture in healthcare professions can further impact. I also want to introduce the idea of the multi-level double empathy theory, which I'm going to be talking about in my thesis. And this is the idea that autistic neurodivergent parents may also have autistic neurodivergent children, and therefore there's a sort of compound impact in all the interactions that we have with professionals, whether that be healthcare professionals or schools, if we're advocating for our children. So it's not only the kind of impact of, for example, in a school, an autistic child may have the communication and understanding differences with the school staff. We may have the same as a parent. So that idea of that multi-level double empathy impact kind of having a knock-on effect is really, really important to be factoring in for neurodivergent parents. And we may also be disproportionately impacted if we're autistic and also disabled, or from marginalised communities, which Hayley talked about a bit earlier. So when services aren't inclusive, that can have a compound effect there too. Important points to think about.
And this is my favorite slide of all. Sorry, Sara, but this is my favorite. And I've kind of borrowed the idea with permission of Caitlin, one of our Marge other members, who is much newer to this PhD game and is much younger and bushy-tailed, and I absolutely see as the future for Marge and other endeavours related to it. But this stat that where we've gone from pregnant autistic zebrafish and nothing else to 70% of the papers reviewed at a given point in time were by Marge members. It's something that if you told me 10 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you. Well, first of all, I probably would have said, as in Simpson, but no, Marge as in Marge, 70%, and it's something that I will never, ever get bored of saying. So, yes, we are very proud mamas. And so there's the front cover of the book, co-authored with my peer from the MSc, Emma Durman, and our lovely autistic midwife and Marge co-founder, Karen Henry. So we are shouting about this as much as Victoria and Jo are, whether it's in a book, an article, all these podcasts, smoke signals, balloon animals. We want to get the message across at whatever juncture, even when I'm in the queue in Morrison's. If someone asks what you do for a living, God help them, I will tell them. But we have been banging on this particular drum for a long time, and now to see that, sorry, I couldn't hide that. I got my happy autistic hands now. Thank you. Excellent book, read in one sitting. I've gone all squishy now. Thank you. But now the tide has turned. Our research skills are undeniable. We've put ourselves through PhD hell for a reason. So it's not just our personal experience. We want to drive for change going forward. But I can't do balloon animals because I've got hypermobile fingers. Sorry.
Thank you, Hayley and Sara. Do you want to finish up before I come in with praise?
Yeah, take a photo of this slide if you fancy it, or just Google Maternity Autism Research Group. We've got a contact form on there. And send us an email telling us what you think. If you want to join, we've got a membership form. We've got plenty of resources reviewed by us, for us. We've got guidelines written by autistic midwives and researchers. We've got a lot on our website, and we're always willing to talk about it. But thank you for letting me. And if there's anything you didn't understand, don't try and read the transcript from a Zoom with my accent, because it's not going to work. So you can send an email if you want.
Thank you, Hayley. Thank you, Sara. That was absolutely phenomenal. So grateful. I can't believe it as well, your amazing pacing and timing. You've covered so much in just under an hour, from the saddest parts that I think we all find quite emotionally difficult to the most heartwarming and joyful things, and the real turn of tide that you set out right at the end there. This is so inspiring. Thank you so much for being here. I've been keeping an eye on the chat, and I don't think there have been too many questions that you haven't already. Most of the things have been commentary on the work you've been doing and sort of expanding on that a little bit. But does anyone have any questions or comments just in these last final moments? We've got another sort of 4 or 5 minutes if anyone would like to write anything in the chat, or if you're brave enough to come on, Mike. Oh, and Victoria's putting her hand up, so I'll maybe pass over to Victoria now.
Thank you so much. I don't want to hog the Q&A, but I do have a couple of questions. I'm so grateful. It's such an inspiring session. So thank you so much. And to see that journey from the research that you talked about, and I've Googled the zebrafish study. That I have to go away and spend some time on that with my marine biology hat on. But through to 70% of the papers, the peer-reviewed work that you mentioned being by Marge members, it's just an incredible thing to be celebrated. I'm so grateful as well that you talked about the intersectionality of experience, and I just wanted to share with everyone on the call that we're looking at this particularly on Thursday. We've got the wonderful Ruby, who is going to talk all about navigating neurodivergence and race in the birth space based on her lived experience as a Black autistic mother. And she also has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so she talks about her experience of hypermobility and particularly in relation to kind of understanding and anesthesia. So that'll be really interesting. Please join us for that. But my question for Hayley and Sara is related to, you mentioned talking about research gaps and kind of looking at midwives' perspectives of caring for autistic people. I also wondered about the research that's going into the experience of autistic midwives in the workplace. And there's, a lot of people on this call who are midwives themselves or who are working as health professionals in all the environments that we find challenging as autistic people to be in. But if you're an autistic birth professional, those challenges are also experienced. I wondered if anyone's looking into that, particularly from an academic research perspective.
Can I come into that? Can I respond to that first, please? So yeah, part of my research was questionnaires with maternity services staff, and also qualitative interviews. And a significant proportion of my respondents were autistic. Obviously, had an interest in the topic. So a lot of my data in my thesis will cover those experiences about perhaps being an autistic student midwife and being an autistic midwife, and some of that's being picked up. But there are autistic midwives talking about their experiences. Karen Henry has done some work and also some research exploring that experience. And published about that. So there's some book articles that Karen's written, and I'm sure there are others as well. Obviously, we've got a lot of autistic midwives and staff in Marge who are talking about their experiences, so some of that will be on our website too. But more needs to be done, more needs to be explored, because we know about the employment barriers for autistic people anyway, with significant numbers of us not in any sort of work. So there are disadvantages in employment already for us. So and it's a challenging environment to be in, I think, from a sensory level, even if we don't take into account the other factors. So that's my sort of initial commentary on that, but I'm sure Hayley may have comments too.
I don't think I do have much to add other than Karen's contact details there, because I believe her department, she's driving some serious change there. But it is something that needs to be studied. I know so many who were drawn to participate in my study. I was kind of preaching to the choir there. There were a lot that I recognized traits in myself to I am diagnosed, who then realized after caring for autistic people and are now unraveling their own identity. So I think we do need to look at the dropout rates, the inaccessibility, the hard truths again in that area.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, just to add as well, another factor into that in my research, there were lots of people that even if they weren't autistic themselves had an autistic family member, and that was driving them to advocate too. So that's something else that comes into this, thinking about the wider family members in research.
Thank you so much, Sara and Hayley. Yes, so incredibly important to touch on that as well, Victoria. Very conscious that we're at 1 o'clock now, and I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, but Lisa has very brilliantly put that this was an inspiring, eye-opening and profound session, and I couldn't agree more. So grateful, Hayley and Sara. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you all of you for coming and giving up your lunch hour. It's been a brilliant session, but we are so grateful. We know how busy everyone is, especially at this busy sort of festive holiday winter time of year if you're joining us in the Northern Hemisphere. Please do come to some other sessions if you've got time this week. Tomorrow we've got wonderful Beth Russell, who is a midwife, a midwifery educator, a legal trainer for a human rights charity, as well as being an antenatal educator, and she will be talking us through the legal framework around neurodivergent care, including this idea of what is a reasonable adjustment? Is it just a luxury add-on? And she'll be dealing with myths, facts, and frameworks that deal with that. So please come again at 12 tomorrow if you want to. And Victoria's touched on Ruby's session as well on Thursday. So that's all from me. Victoria, have I missed anything out in my first go at introducing things today and finishing it off as well?
No, it was just wonderful. Thank you, Jo, for facilitating, and thank you to everyone for attending, and of course to Hayley and Sara and the Marge team for this incredible session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good rest of the day, and hopefully we'll see you again later on this week, or when you get in touch with us at Neurodivergent Birth, or get in touch with Marge as well. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.